Welcome to This Explainer. We've all seen those slick Hollywood movies featuring sophisticated, unstoppable thieves pulling off impossible heists. But in the real world, well, the spectrum of criminal intelligence is incredibly wide. Today, we're exploring the fascinating and honestly often hilarious psychological gap between brilliant heists and absolute criminal blunders. We're going to answer one specific burning question. Why exactly do criminals commit such spectacularly failed robberies?
So what actually separates a brilliant criminal mastermind from a complete amateur? Let's skip the small talk and jump right into the heart of the matter. Because to understand why so many criminals fail in such comical ways, we first need to establish a baseline of what a highly competent professional robbery actually looks like.
Section 1. The perfect foil. The 2006 Banco Rio heist. To really get why modern robberies fail so spectacularly, we need to look at a historic success from Buenos Aires. Back in 2006, a crew walked into a Banco Rio branch and pulled off a $19 million heist by being, quite frankly, remarkably boring. Notice their unbelievable composure here. They didn't rely on screaming or weapons. Instead, they ordered pizza for the staff and literally sang happy birthday to a captive lawyer. By the time police finally entered, the crew had completely vanished on a boat through the city's sewer system. They even left a poetic note saying, "Without weapons or grudges, it's just money, not love." Because they used calm control as their primary weapon, witnesses couldn't even describe them to the police.
Section 2. The hilarious heist failures when amateurs strike. Now contrast that meticulous, boring perfection with the absolute absurdity of how an amateur operates. Okay, picture this. In Maryland, a man snatched a 3.5-month-old tuxedo kitten named Magnolia from a pet store to use as his primary robbery accessory. He then marched across the parking lot into a PNC bank, kitten in hand.
And get this, he literally asked the bank manager to hold the kitten while he wrote out his robbery demand note. He lacked the basic foresight to write the note before stealing the cat. Unsurprisingly, this brilliant master plan completely tanked. He was promptly arrested, and the kitten happily bonded with the bank staff.
Or how about Albert Bailey in Connecticut? This guy quite literally called ahead to order his stolen cash like it was Friday night takeout so he wouldn't have to cause a scene. 10 minutes before he arrived at the bank, he phoned them to request a sack of cash just be left on the floor. He presumably didn't want to wait in line or struggle with parking. Naturally, the police had zero trouble piecing together this incredibly simple plan.
Then there's Daniel Rhines. His strategy? Handing a teller two real, completely valid forms of ID and filling out an application before suddenly announcing he was actually there to rob the place. He seriously sat there discussing opening an account, then midway through the paperwork just changed his mind and pulled a gun. Needless to say, leaving your home address with the teller is a guaranteed way to fail.
And we definitely can't forget the duo down in Florida who smashed into a South Beach bank at 5:45 a.m. on a Sunday. With the cash locked securely in a time-delayed vault, their total lack of a backup plan meant they just settled for heavy sacks of quarters, dimes, and nickels. The massive weight slowed them down tremendously, and to make matters worse, their getaway driver was passed out drunk at the wheel. It is just the absolute ultimate failure of logistics.
So, the real question we have to ask here is, what exactly explains this massive gap in criminal intelligence? How do we exist in a world that produces both the masterful Banco Rio sewer escape and a guy who brings a tiny kitten to a bank heist?
Section 3. Professionals versus amateurs. The criminology of robbery.
To figure this out, we can look at a really fascinating profiling study from the University of Birmingham. They basically split offenders into two distinct types, the career professional and the amateur antisocial. The professional is older, plans meticulously, and uses what's called instrumental violence. That means they use just enough fear as an instrument to control the room, exactly like our Banco Rio crew. The amateur, on the flip side, is usually under 30, super chaotic, and relies on expressive violence. They act out with physical aggression purely because they completely lack the cognitive ability to control the situation.
When you look at the demographics, a lot of these amateurs are early school leavers with very few skills. The data shows roughly 80% are completely unemployed, and they're usually committing crimes just to fuel substance abuse. For them, a robbery isn't a planned business venture. It's a desperate, highly impulsive act. This totally explains why a getaway driver might be passed out drunk. They're operating under the influence, and their rational thinking is severely impaired.
And because of this cognitive impairment, amateurs almost always fall back on sloppy, impulsive tactics. Criminologists call these the blitz and the snatch. The Birmingham study shows they either use overwhelming, chaotic physical force, the blitz, or they just make a desperate grab for whatever happens to be closest, the snatch. They just don't have the patience, the sobriety, or the skill to execute anything more complex than that.
Section 4. The Cost-Benefit Calculus.
All of this builds into a really core criminological concept known as rational choice theory. Basically, this theory dictates whether a robbery will be a slick operation or a total disaster. A professional acts as a rational agent. They do the math perfectly, weighing the risks against the potential yield. They assess security, they plan escape routes, but our desperate, drug-fueled amateur completely ignores the calculus. They walk in on a total whim, ignoring cameras and alarms, driven purely by immediate need, without any long-term thinking whatsoever.
This distinction perfectly explains the different execution styles we see out there. A professional relies on highly planned con or confrontation approaches. The con style involves amicability and extending time with the victim, much like ordering pizza for the hostages. The confrontation style relies on strict, planned verbal demands to maintain order. Both of these require a level of cognitive restraint that the amateur simply does not possess.
Section 5. Why amateurs are all that's left.
But wait, if professionals are so incredibly smart, why are we seeing so many hilariously dumb failures in the news today? Well, it mostly comes down to target hardening. Banks fundamentally broke the cost-benefit math for professionals by installing toughened glass, time-delayed vaults, and incredibly advanced surveillance. For a rational, career professional, a 50% chance of conviction simply isn't worth the risk anymore. So they've displaced their efforts into easier, much more lucrative avenues like cybercrime or fraud.
This massive shift essentially eliminated the calculating mastermind from the physical world. It abandoned the brick-and-mortar bank lobbies to what criminologists call the unusual suspect, someone acting out of sheer desperation, lack of education, or deep substance dependency. They fail in spectacular comical ways because they were never cognitively equipped to succeed in the first place.
It's an absolutely fascinating shift in human behavior, leaving us to really wonder what the future of physical crime will actually look like. As our physical world becomes an impenetrable fortress, is the era of the criminal mastermind totally over, leaving us with only the absurd comedy of amateur errors? Or will there always be someone, somewhere, who thinks bringing a kitten to a bank robbery is a foolproof plan? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll see you next time.